Hello everyone, and welcome to this parallel event on this session on Commission on the Status of Women. The event has the topic of sexualized exploitation of women and girls and the global climate crisis. And this event is organized by the Swedish organizations Unizon and Men. And the event is officially sponsored by the Government Office of Sweden. Warmly welcome. My name is Rebecca Andersson. I'm the Secretary General of Unizon. Before we begin, let me guide you through some technical moments. As attendees, you are automatically muted, and also your cameras are automatically off. You will remain muted throughout the entire event. Of course, we would like to hear your thoughts and comments and questions. So you can easily leave comments in the chat. And for questions for the panelists, please use the Q&A box down below in your Zoom window. The event is being recorded. The recording will later be accessible online via our organizations. And if by the end of this event today you have more questions, you are more than welcome to contact us with any and all questions. Next slide, please. So Unizon, the organization that I represent, is a national umbrella organization in Sweden for more than 130 organizations spread throughout the land. We are gathering women's shelters, young women empowerment centers, youth empowerment centers, and also support services specialized in sexualized violence. Last year, our member organizations supported women and girls and children on almost 140,000 occasions. We work, previous slide please, we work basically around 4 areas of work. Of course, we work with shelter. I think that's a very common view that many people have of women's shelters and the women's shelter movement, the actual physical shelter that women and children go to when they need to escape their violent abuser. And the shelters, of course, provide that physical protection, but they also provide support services alongside with the youth and young women empowerment centers, which is support groups on and offline, anything that a woman and a child in need of support might need. We also work with violence prevention, because we believe that to end men's violence against women, we need to prevent it from occurring in the first place. And we also believe that our knowledge of decades of giving support to women and children who are victims of violence gives us a unique knowledge that needs to be a part of the preventional work. We also do a lot of advocacy work. The shelter movement started in Sweden some 45 years ago. And the one thing that we agreed upon very early was that we will not be silenced and we will not keep quiet about the things that we hear. So the advocacy work is very important. Next slide, please. We are organizing this event together with the organization Men for Gender Equality. They are an NGO, same as Unizon, who work for gender equality and against violence, and they are working to redefining masculinity. A lot of men's work is attached to violence prevention, such as actual structural work in schools, etc., and work with municipalities and organizations throughout Sweden to prevent men's violence against women and girls. They also have a support service for boys, which you can find at killar.se. And they also work a lot with gender equal parenting, engaging men to be more equal parents. Men and Unizon have been working together for a long time, and we believe that joining forces makes it more accessible for us to reach our joint goal, which is to end men's violence against women. Next slide, please. The basis of our work when it comes to sexual exploitation of women and girls, but also the basis of this seminar, is the equality model, also known as the Nordic model. The Nordic model was, Sweden was the first country in the world to criminalize the purchase of sexual acts. It became a law in Sweden in 1999, so we are going on 23 years with this law, and it has since spread to more countries. The basis of this law is the stories and experiences of women and girls in prostitution. And the actual meaning of the law is that it's criminalized to purchase sexual acts. However, the women and girls in prostitution are not criminalized. The other part of the law is to support and help women and girls exit prostitution. This is a very important tool in Sweden, and the police use the law and see it as an instrument to combat human trafficking for the purpose of sexualized exploitation. The results of the implementation of this law is that Sweden is less attractive for traffickers and pimps, and it has also had normative effects. The normative shift of people's mind in Sweden has been enormous, and we see that making it criminal to purchase a woman and a girl's body has shifted the mindset of the victims of prostitution and the attitudes towards those who choose to commit this crime. Next slide, please. Right, on to this seminar for today. Why are we talking about sexualized exploitation, the concept in the context of the climate crisis? Global climate change has had noticeable negative effects on the environment and people's lives all over the globe, and it's hitting the most vulnerable groups, such as women and girls, the hardest. Devastating consequences of the ongoing climate crisis make it easier to lure women and girls into exploitation and to exploit them in the sex industry. At the same time, the connection between the issue of climate change and sexualized exploitation is rarely discussed, hence the topic of this seminar today. Dr. Melissa Farley lifts the question on the strong connection that exists between resource extraction, sexualized exploitation of women and girls, poverty, and climate change. Although resource extraction and sexualized exploitation has been viewed as separate phenomena, they are related harms that result in multiple violations of human rights to women and girls. The businesses of resource extraction and prostitution adversely impact women's lives, especially those who are poor, ethnically or racially marginalized, or young. In different parts of the world, we have already seen how climate change leads to crisis in people's ability to survive extreme events, such as drought, floods, or agricultural collapse. These catastrophes result in poverty, which then mediates and channels women into the sex trade. Today, we have an eminent panel of women frontline organizations from Kenya, Mexico, Mongolia, and the USA. They will share about their experiences on the local level, and together we will explore the links between resource extraction, climate displacement, and other consequences of climate change. On the one hand, and growing vulnerability and exploitation of women and girls. On to our amazing speakers. You will hear from 4 women today. Florence Kea from Kenya, Rossio Orozco from Mexico, Dolso Porevyav from Mongolia, and Vednita Carter from the US. They will each have a moment to share their work and their views, and after that we will have a joint panel discussion. First up is Florence Kea from Kenya. Florence is an activist, feminist, and a survivor of sexual violence. She has 6 years experience in trauma counseling and paralegal work with focus on sexual violence issues and the law. She's the founder of Meisha Girls, an initiative that brings together girls and young women who have survived sexual violence from across parts of Kenya. Florence, the screen is yours. Florence, I think you might be muted. One moment, Florence. Sorry, we're experiencing some difficulties with the technology. We can't hear you. Just asking for a bit of a patience, and everyone will try to fix this technology issue so we can hear Florence shortly. Florence, you could go to the mute button next to it. There's a small arrow, and you can see if the source of your mic is the same.
Nu, vänta, jag ska se. Jag frågar om hon kan unmute. Nej. Okej, vi tar nästa speaker så länge. Så vi skriver med henne.
Florence, my support team will write you in the chat room, and we will leave your presentation for a while. I hope that's okay for everyone. We're looking forward. Oh, I can hear something now. Who can I hear?
You hear me now?
Yeah. Great, Florence. So good.
Oh, okay.
Thank you so much for your patience. And now, here we go. Florence Kea, the screen is yours.
Yes, before I say anything, first of all, I would like to start in solidarity with women and children in Ukraine. I'm actually condemning the violations of human rights and especially helpless women. Just to show them I fully recognize the women, their suffering, and also putting them in the minds throughout this conversation. And my name is Florence, as you heard, and I'm from Nairobi, Kenya. I'm an activist also, and I run a shelter, and also a member of the global movement called the Brave Movement. As Meisha, what I normally do, I rescue women and girls who are going through sexual violence, sexualized violence actually, and we in conjunction with other organizations, we offer psychosocial support, temporary shelter. We make sure they get legal access, they get treatment, and also they go through the process of healing, trauma healing. I'm working in conjunction with an organization in Sweden also called Talita. So we have a Talita house in Nairobi, Kenya, that is also for girls who have been trafficked for prostitution in other countries. And I'm so glad to be in this webinar because climate change is very, very dear to my heart, and the damage humanity is inflicting on nature has also fueled violence against women around the world, and especially in Africa. And people tend to separate these issues, but they're linked together, so we don't really need to overlook them. And just saying that there's an urgency that when we talk about environmental degradation, we should talk about taking action to stop gender-based violence, especially sexualized violations against women. Thank you, and stay tuned, and I'm so glad to be here. Yeah. Yeah, it was introduction. Am I still on air or disappeared?
You're still on air. Would you like to explore something along with the topic, or do you feel that you are done? Should we move on to the next speaker, or would you like to continue?
Maybe I'll just continue on the matter of today about climate change and exploitation of women, and I would also like just to show that in Africa and also in Kenya, there is more frequent and intense droughts, storms, heat waves, rising sea levels, and also warming oceans that are really destroying and harming animals. They destroy the places they live in and wreak havoc on people's livelihoods and communities. As climate change worsens, dangerous weather events are becoming more and more frequent or severe. Like right now in Kenya, it's very, very hot, something that we have never experienced in any other years. It's extremely hot, which only happens on the coast, but now it's happening even in other areas of the country. So environmental crimes such as poaching that happens in Africa, illegal resource extraction, are also leading to gender-based violence, and especially sexual violence. And these threats and this violence, which includes rape, are often used to target actually also women who are environmental activists like me, and their status within the community, and also this prevents them from working to preserve the environment from the construction of mines and dams. So in this sitting, that I will also share so much about what is actually happening and the damages the climate change is causing, and the linkage between climate change and sexualized activities among women and girls and children, and also men in the country. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much, Florence. It will be very interesting. Would you like to share some of those views now already, specifically what you just mentioned, the shifts in the sexual activities, but also the increase of gender-based violence and sexualized violence in terms of the climate changes? Would you like to explore that some bit?
Yes, climate vulnerability is often, right now, is often forcing rural populations to migrate to urban areas, and also decongesting the urban areas. And this has also led to women crossing borders, and the risks to women, female migrants, it's a lot in, most of them, they cross borders thinking that they will get life outside there, but then they end up into sexual exploitation and trafficking. And as right now, immigrant labor in Kenya is very high. So many young women and even underage girls are easy targets, because now agriculture is not bringing in enough resources. There's a lot of violations when women and girls want to maybe to be part of communities and societies, and there's violations also through other resources that offer women stable income. So for me, I think mostly what I would like to say is there's so many challenges that are happening right now. Like, for example, there's child marriages that people are using as a survival strategy so that they can mitigate the damages of climate change and the damages of lack of resources. And in this way, that girls, especially in northern Kenya and its environments, are also being sold off in marriages. This is because the families think that it is a way of maybe survival for the young girls, and this actually is hindering growth and what women can offer to the society and the community. And this strategy is not only in Kenya that we have early child marriage as a survival strategy. We have it still in other parts of Africa. And the daughters, getting rid of a daughter in such a situation, it's really sad, and we are keeping a blind eye on almost everything. And also some things we call like even sex for fish, where we have women living on many African coasts and lakes have also suffered as fish has become scarce. And fishermen peddling their wares are now not only expecting money as payment, they are also demanding sex. This practice is now so common in Western Kenya that it has a name, and they call it Jaboya. Jaboya is a name, it's in an active language. I don't know how to explain it in English, but this is also a very sad situation, especially in Kenya, where women are denied access to the few resources. Like now what we've said, fish is scarce, and because of climate change, so women are not actually accessing these resources, and that was a source of livelihood. And also, as women struggle to make ends meet, they often resort to damaging coping mechanism, and that is going into the easiest way to get money, which includes prostitution, and making themselves also just becoming vulnerable for trafficking and being used in sexual exploitation. I think for now I can end there, but when I get time I will go on around and just share about how the crime increases. This environmental, I call it environmental crime, increases the sexual and based violence. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Florence. It's such interesting. I'm writing everything down. It's very, very important what you're saying, especially with the being denied resources and the lack of resources. And we always know, of course, that women and girls are victims of exploitation in those situations. Thank you so much, Florence. We will come back to you during the panel discussion. Thank you. Moving on to another part of the world, we're moving to Mexico now. Next speaker is Rossio Orozco. She's one of the most recognized anti-trafficking activists in the world, precursor in Mexico of the general law against human. Her altruistic efforts have prevented more than 3 million people about human trafficking through the media and has trained nearly 100,000 authorities. She has directly supported more than 300 victims to write a new story and open up their new life. Her rescue work, creation of shelters, and defense of human rights has earned her a nominee for Nobel Peace Prize, as well as several distinctions. Rossio Orozco, the screen is yours.
Hi, thank you. It's such an honor, and we admire so much what Sweden has made during so many years to end human trafficking and to give the women the position that in a country should always have. So I think you are an example to the world, and it's such an honor to be participating in this panel. Well, in human trafficking and climate change, Mexico has so much to share because gender inequalities, I don't know if you can put the next slide, please. Gender inequalities intersect with climate risk and vulnerabilities. Women's historical disadvantage make the women highly vulnerable to climate changes. Since the nature of this vulnerability varies widely, generalizations are not appropriate, but climate change may increase existing patterns of gender disadvantage, and we can see in our country. Next slide, please. We have so much diversity in Mexico. We are 4th place in biodiversity, so it's incredible what Mexico has, but sadly, the 2nd place in deforestation. And we have so many organized crime, sadly, that it's in, for example, the field where the avocado is cultivating, or lemon, the area of Michoacan is the states. We have so much organized crime, and so sad for the people that are working there. So a lot of these people has to move to another place because the organized crime is really taking their properties or extortionate them, blackmail them, kidnapping, and they have to go to another place and sadly to leave their cities. This makes them very vulnerable. And we also have, next slide, if you could please help me. We have also a lot of wood that comes from illegal resources. This is a study carried of the UNAM. UNAM is the name of the Autonomous University of Mexico, and 70% they said it's illegal in the wood industry. And of course, around these, a lot of men, women, and children moves to another state, sometimes in conditions that are really bad. Many of the women goes to big cities looking for job, and some end being labor exploitation in homes where they will be cleaning and doing a lot of work without security, without a contract, without all the dignity they should have. A lot of them in slavery, literally. So this climate change, this situation of organized crime makes especially women very vulnerable. Next slide, please. From 2,456 municipalities, we find that in Mexico, climate change has made 56% very vulnerable. 20 million people live in those states that are the most vulnerable. And global warming, climate change, and its effects, such as extreme weathers, droughts, floods, and hurricanes, also contribute in this vulnerability. Many of these states are having violence, and the indigents, especially the indigents, suffer discrimination when they go to the cities. And it's so sad to see, next slide, things like what happened with the chamulas and many indigents that ends even in sexual exploitation. These displaced, the people being displaced, in 2015, we estimate that 91,000 people were displaced by the environmental issues in Mexico. The condition of our country of inequality or extreme poverty have left around 11 million citizens without access to justice, social coercion, economic growth, and the full realization of their human rights. Next slide, please. Especially something that is so sad is even BBC made an investigation in one of the areas of the indigents, the Chamulas. They were coming out of with pornography, even children, that what they called ethno porn. And it was really sad. It was horrible. And the sexual exploitation of indigents in the areas where they tolerate prostitution, that we know in Mexico 90% is human trafficking, and especially in the borders in the north where we have the border with the United States, and in the south that we have with Central America, it's so bad, the sexual exploitation. So women vulnerability is especially people that are indigent, sexual abuse at home, especially after coronavirus, violence at home, and extreme poverty. Next slide, please. All these states, Aguascalientes, Baja California, Chiapas, Chihuahua, Ciudad de Mexico, all these states especially are the municipalities that are highly vulnerable to global warming and climate change. And many of these people, and even in other countries, we have a lot of pimping, a lot of traffickers that will take, by deceive a girl, they go to these places. I have been in jail for 3 years. I visit jails and I visit the traffickers that we have. Most of the pimps of the girls that we have in our shelters, 98% are in the jail. We have good lawyers. So we went to visit them to understand a little bit of their mind, and they will tell you how they visit these places, these states, knowing that the girls were very vulnerable, and some of them were telling us how they bought food or things for them, and the parents will be like, oh wow, this is a very rich guy, and my daughter is with a very important person, because they will come with a impressive car, a very nice car, and buying things for the family. So they were telling me they were looking for the most vulnerable people, and especially where we have the climate change problems, they will find them starving, really, literally starving. So it was very easy for them to make them feel love and that they were Prince Charming, and they will give them the best life, to end in the places where there is prostitution and there is a lot of suffering. Most of them are beaten, are with a lot of violence, and being raped every day, 30 to 40 times a day. Next slide, please. We have a lack of shelters. We have no governmental funds at all. And worst of that, now we have the Human Rights Commission acting as persecuting what the shelters are doing. It's incredible the way they don't even help but the victims, but instead of that, acting like persecuting, like trying to end the few shelters that we have. So it is a very bad situation now in Mexico for the shelters. But anyway, organized society, we are working, fighting, and helping victims, and we will never end, because 10 of the survivors now works in our shelters, in our NGOs, and that's incredible. That's our dream. We believe in giving the victims a blank page. We call it blank page. I'm sorry, a blank page. That's the name of my book, where 10 survivors gives their testimony. We call it blank page because they have the right to have a new story. They have the right to be in a shelter, being helped until they have wings to fly, until they have a blank page to write their dreams and be able to fulfill them. So we are in the process to open 2 more in Quintana Roo and Chihuahua. There is people working for 2 more shelters in a very difficult conditions, but we know that Sweden has an example of this, and we are learning from you too. I think that's the last slide, if you can help me. And thank you so much for being an example. And I am really ready to learn more from all of you. Thank you so much to be doing this event. And we all have a saying in our organization that says, united, we will make the difference.
Rossio, for this eloquent presentation, and so interesting. I'm so moved by this last things you said about the blank page. I coming from the shelter movement, I highly feel attached to it. The right to a new story and giving wings to fly. It's amazing what women can do when we come together. Thank you so much, Rossio. We will come back to you as well in the panel, of course. Moving on, we're going across the globe once again. The benefits of digital seminars. We are swiftly moving to Mongolia. Dolso Porevyav is an activist and child protection program coordinator at Talita Asia in Mongolia. Talita is an organization who support women exiting the sex trade. Dolso, the screen is yours.
Thank you. Thank you. It is very exciting to be a part of this incredible event here. And my name is Rossio, and I am the program coordinator at Talita Asia, Mongolia. Before I start, I would like to give a little bit of information of my country. Next slide, please. As you can see on this map, Mongolia is a landlocked country sandwiched between Russia and China, 2 big nations, with a population of just over 3.3 million people. And 51% of the population are women, and half the population's 1.5, almost 1.6 million people lives in the capital city. We apparently are the 18th largest country in the world, with a territory of 1.5 million square kilometers, which is almost 4 times our size of Sweden. We have extreme climate conditions. In the winter times, the temperature drops to -40, and in summer it rises up to 40. So quite extreme. And we are very rich in the mineral resources, especially gold, copper, coal, uranium, and such, especially in the southern region of the country, bordering with China. So lots of mines are newly developed, and especially 2 big mines. One is for coal, the other one is gold and the copper. So next slide, please. Talita Asia was founded in September 2013 with the support and assistance from Talita in Sweden. Our work is primarily focused on preventing girls and women being exploited to the prostitution and human trafficking for sexual purposes. And we also provide a long-term shelter and services. Currently, we have 6 full-time and 2 part-time employees, and we operate 2 shelter homes and 1 transition apartment. In the shelters, we can accommodate up to 10 girls and women, and transition apartment up to 4 girls. Currently, we have 8 girls in our shelter homes. Main focus is for, providing service for the girls between the age of 13 and 21. Next slide, please. So like I said, we operate 2 shelters for the target group, and also a center for a safe place to meet the women and the girls who do have a place to stay, but who wants to leave the prostitution and find new ways of living. Of course, they need the help with the processing of trauma, but more importantly, for them to discover their own values as a human beings. We offer at the shelters, we offer trauma therapy, life coaching, planning for the future, different forms of practical help, and transition to independent living. Our mission is to offer the beneficiaries an opportunity for inner healing and a changed life. Since 2014, the establishment of our shelters, we provided long-term support. Long-term, 12 to 24 month support for 39 women with the children who are the victims of domestic violences, and 18 girls and boys, the victim of trafficking in persons and sexual exploitations. During their stay at our shelters, they receive comprehensive services, including trauma therapy, psychological counseling, and access to education, health, legal assistance, and also job placement opportunities. In addition to our shelters and the protection for the victims of the sexual exploitation, we also facilitate the capacity building trainings to the frontline officers of local NGOs and the government agencies, for example, case management, shelter management, service provision, reintegration, and trauma-informed care. Last year, we facilitated about 9 trainings for government employees and other NGO officers. Next slide, please. Yes, we had, especially last couple of years, because of the COVID, we had quite a bit of a challenges, mainly because of the lockdown and the travel restrictions in the city and in the country. And some of the services, including health, education, training, and employment opportunities, were actually suspended or very little access to it. Secondly, we were unable to get any referral from the other NGOs or the government agencies because of the restriction again. We did have some vacancies, but because of the restriction, we could not offer services directly. So another challenge we faced was all the communications, the face-to-face communications went to online communications. So it took quite some time for us, both the NGOs or government agencies, as to adjust to, to get used to the online communication referral mechanism and support. What we see in the country is because of the lockdown, the sexual exploitation, prostitution went underground, and it actually affected young girls, like teenagers aged 13 to 15. And the number of children victimized by this type of crime actually increased dramatically. So, and then another challenges we are facing is, I'm not sure how is it in the other countries, it's a turnover rate in the government agencies that really impacts our work. I think it's partly because of this political reasons. It's whichever of our political parties wins the election or the government state, they appoint their own people despite the fact, the skills or the experiences of the previous frontline officers. So it is very challenging to deal with the different people, you know, every time. So next slide, please. We, the Asia, have a strong desire to combat the prostitution and human trafficking for sexual exploitations. And we believe that every little effort makes a huge difference. Therefore, with the cooperation with the other frontline organizations are very crucial to the work we do. So we work with, we cooperate with the local NGOs, like including World Vision Mongolia, the Asia Foundation, around Mongolia, who work in child protection and in field, and as well as the government agencies, the police, crime, organized crime units, witness protection agency, and so on. We also collaborate with the international organizations such as Teliton in Sweden and the CAP International in France. Last year, I think a year ago, we collaborate with the CAP International along with the 5 other organizations in the countries, in 5 countries, to start the exit program to help the young girls to exit the prostitution. So under this program, we have 2 activities to implement. One is to organize a series of a workshop and train among the secondary school students, their parents, and the teachers for prevention and raise awareness. And the second activity is to reach out to mining affected communities, especially in the southern region of the country where it borders with China, and hopefully to start another shelter to help the girls and the women who needs our help. So when I prepared my presentation, I thought I will give a brief about what we do in Mongolia and what the challenges we are facing, and then later on in the panel discussion, I can share a little bit more about how climate change is affecting the women and the girls. So thank you. That's for now. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Those are so interesting to hear. I keep getting questions in my head and I'm saving them for the panel discussions. Also very interesting to hear about the lockdown. I have so many questions about that as well, and comparisons. I think many of you know in Sweden, we really didn't have an actual lockdown, and I'm very interested in hearing the differences and how these decisions affected the vulnerable women and girls. But thank you so much. We will come back to you during the panel discussion. Thank you. Last but not least, we're moving on to the United States of America. Next speaker is Vednita Carter. She's the founder of Breaking Free and Vednita Carter Presents. She's also ambassador at large at the United Nations. She's an author, sought-after speaker, trainer, and award-winning pioneer in the abolitionist movement in the United States. Vednita, the screen is yours.
Thank you. I'm really happy to be here. And definitely, again, I'll say with Sweden, I've tried to keep my eye on you all with that Nordic model. And, you know, we're trying to do something similar here in the United States. Ours will be called the equality model. And so that's a wonderful thing. And I'm glad that Sweden took the went after it, and I'm sure it wasn't easy. So I would just start. I've written down my speech, and so I would just start reading it. Black women find ourselves in a unique and extremely difficult position in our society. We are forced to deal with the oppression that arises from being Black in a white supremacist culture, and the oppression that arises from being female in a male supremacist culture. As a young Black woman, I and a girlfriend of mine, she was white, were induced into getting involved in the sex trade under the guise of becoming a dancer, which was really becoming a stripper. Once in, we were immediately separated. She was sent down one path and I was sent down another. At the time, I didn't understand why we were separated, but after a while I understood. I was sent to the dies, the lower places where it was highly likely that you would encounter some form of violence, sexual assault, or rape. There was no protection or security. This was a place where the white women would not go and were never sent. Only Black women and other women of color. I soon realized that I needed to get out of this life and quick. I felt a change taking place within me. I was doing things that I never thought I would do. I was becoming someone that I didn't want to be. I got out. It took me some years to heal. I finally got to that place where I wanted to get back in, but through a different door, for a different reason. I wanted to help women and girls to get out. I wanted to let them know that there is a better way, that they are valuable and they don't deserve to be displayed on an auction block to be bought and sold. I founded a program called Breaking Free in St. Paul, Minnesota in 1996 that worked specifically with women and girls who had been used in systems of prostitution and other areas of the sex trade. Breaking Free worked with 500 prostituted women yearly, of which 87% were Black American. In Minnesota, Black Americans make up about 10% of the population. It's very clear as to how racism makes Black women and girls especially vulnerable to sexual exploitation and keeps them trapped in the sex industry. While working at Breaking Free, I will never forget the time that one of the women who participated in the program told me that when she was involved in the life, she and her Black friend were both working the streets. They got pulled over by the police and made to get into his vehicle. Immediately, the officer told the Black woman to get out of the car and go back to what she was doing, which was prostitution. The white woman became very upset and asked, why couldn't she get out of the car and go with her friend? The officer told her because he wanted to teach her a lesson. She should know better. She had potential. Where that was not the case for the Black woman. She was white. I'm sorry. Black woman to get out of the car and to go back, okay, was doing. The white woman became very upset and asked why couldn't she get out of the car and go with her friend. The officer told her because he wanted to teach her a lesson, she should know better. She had potential. Where that was not the case for the Black woman, she was doing all she knew to do. He then took her to jail. The white police officer portrayed a racist mentality that is woven through all of white society on how Black women are perceived. Racist stereotypes in the mainstream media and in pornography portray Black women as wild animals who are ready for any kind of sex, anytime, with anybody. Once a Black woman gets into prostitution, it becomes more difficult for her to get out of the life than her white counterparts. The red light district is typically right in the Black neighborhood, which gives a message to white men that it is all right to solicit Black women and girls for sex, that we are all prostitutes. Racism in the courts results in Black women paying higher fines and doing more jail time than white women. Probation officers and child protection workers create nearly impossible case plans for Black women, setting them up and causing them to fail, resulting in their being returned to jail or losing their children. The greatest number of deaths, I want to talk just a little bit about how COVID has impacted the Black community and what has been happening since COVID. It's been very difficult for women, specifically Black women, to get services during this time. So many of the organizations that provide services, there's not tons of them, but there are a few. They're not open. What they're doing is they're working from home. And so you have to call them, and it's if they think that your situation is in a dire situation, they may come, you know what I mean, or send someone to help or to get you or to take you to the hospital, whatever the need might be. But it's rare that Black women get the assistance that they need when they make these calls. And that's common. That's very common here. The greatest number of deaths from COVID-19 are among racial groups who have historically suffered more from chronic health conditions and had less access to healthcare. In April of 2020, Black Americans were approximately 81% of the COVID-19 deaths in Milwaukee County, whose population is only 26% Black American. Latinos were suffering from the same high rates of COVID-19 in New York as African Americans in Milwaukee. Black and Latino New Yorkers were dying from coronavirus at twice the rate of white people in early April 2019. Black women are more likely to suffer from lack of food, shelter, and healthcare, all of which increase their risk of contracting COVID-19. Understanding what it's like to be anxious about access to food and shelter is key to understanding the risks taken by people in prostitution. Knowing they were risking their lives, many women prostituted during the pandemic. Poverty will kill us before the coronavirus, said an Indian woman in prostitution. A woman in the United States explained, "You might survive the virus, but you won't survive not eating for 2 months." If you ask any rational person if they'd rather take the virus or not eat, that's not even a thought. The pandemic reveals the exploitation and violence in all forms of prostitution, including sugar daddy, sugar baby prostitution, cell phone, escort prostitution, massage parlor prostitution, street prostitution, and the list goes on and on. A San Francisco group mainstreaming prostitution as work admitted people who are doing street-based sex work may not be able to stop doing sex work to survive. But this comment conceals the overlap between all arms of the sex trade. Again, whether street work, cell phone work, escort, massage, strip club, whatever it is, women don't stay in one location in prostitution. They move from one physical and online location to another, wherever the sex buyers are located or where the pimps send them. Consumer electronic conferences, sports events, military bases, escort to street, and then they go back again. In conclusion, we all want resources for women to be able to exit prostitution. But the same defects, racism and poverty that were there when we entered prostitution are the same barriers to leaving prostitution. We cannot just focus on eradication of prostitution without the same passion for its end and provision of resources to make it possible. If we want to obtain these necessary resources, we must embrace legislation that holds buyers accountable via fines where arrested in amounts that are much greater than those used to buy us in the first place. One thing that Breaking Free provides is called a John School, or this is a class where men are court ordered to attend who have solicited women in prostitution. And what they do, they attend this class. It's once a month, it's 8 hours a day. And they pay, I think they pay now because I've just retired from Breaking Free, but they pay $800 and they have to attend. If they don't attend, what happens is the police say they're supposed to go to jail. They're given warrants and they're arrested for not attending class. And during the class, what happens is the men are taught, we teach them or tell them about how their behavior impacts women who are in the life, impacts the women's families, not only their families, but the families of the men who purchased them. And so what we do is we go through, there's a lot of different community members that come to this class and talk about how they feel about these men coming into their neighborhoods and soliciting the women in their communities, and how that impacts the little girls who are standing on the bus stops waiting for school buses. And it's to me it's really educational, and I do believe that they learn a lot. From what we've been told by police, less than 3% of men who have attended this class have been rearrested. So to me, that makes a big difference, because over the course of a year, we've probably had a couple hundred men that have been arrested for soliciting women that have attended the class, and less than 3% have been rearrested. But I always say, we don't know if they've gone to another city, you know, or another county or something like that. But so far, it has been working. But what they did during the shutdown, the COVID, and everything was shut down, they stopped doing stings. They stopped arresting men. They stopped arresting women. I mean, everything was kind of like a free for all on the women. And we were finding that women were really getting brutalized during this time, beat up, having to go to the hospital. Many of them were living in tents downtown because they couldn't find shelters. It was just a real ugly situation. And it really still is. Breaking Free has 30 apartment units for families, and they stay full. They're permanent housing programs. And we also had a transitional housing that housed about 15 women and their children, and that was for 2 years. But they stayed full. And right now it's to the point where they're literally, because everything is still so shut down because of COVID, women are being forced to live on the street. They have no options, is what I'm saying. And for them, some of them want to go to jail because they say at least they feel safe in the jail. But there's just so much happening right now, and there's so much work to do, that one of the focuses that I have, since I am retired, is focus on legislators, you know, and talking to them. What can happen? What needs to be, what can they change? What can we do? We need money, we know that, and there's limited government money as always, but there's just so much to be done. But I'm happy to say some things have been done, but just not enough. And the people who suffer the brunt of all of this are usually the Black women and other women of color. So I tell people we've came a long way, but we have a long way to go. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Venita. This is so interesting. I could listen to all of you all day. And thank you, Venita, for providing us with the necessary intersectional perspective on women and girls who are victims of the sex trade. Yes. It's highly important to highlight and address the differences in the vulnerabilities, and how a lot of women of color and girls of color are more at risk and more vulnerable.
Yes.
Thank you so much.
Mm-hmm.
We will now move on to the panel discussion. Let's see if we can get all of you into the view. I'm hearing, of course, you've all provided a view of the vulnerability that comes with certainly climate change, but also like the pandemic and situations that impact us all as a community or as a society or as the whole world. But I'm also hearing it's making me think about resources, because all of you expressed that resources are at core of this, of course, and I agree. But it made me think, because in Sweden, the environmental crisis is high up on the agenda right now. Certainly a lot of issues as well. But we know that the climate crisis is very, time is of the essence. And it's we don't have much time to save the planet, meaning that a lot of politicians and legislators are willing to spend money to somehow try to prohibit the crisis. But my question is for you, are they also willing to, is this true for your country? Is the environmental crisis on the agenda in your country, but also is the exploitation of women and girls in the sex trade also on the agenda? And how, I'm not willing to compare crisis to crisis, but if we are going to fund and give resources to one crisis, my firm belief is that we should do so to the other one as well. Meaning, I want to see resources to help women and girls exit the sex trade, but also end the sexual exploitation of women and girls. So how's the situation in your respective countries in terms of resources, but also the discussions? Are these discussions held in your country in terms of the climate crisis, but also the exploitation of women and girls? Florence, would you like to start?
So maybe I say that is actually Kenya. Kenya is a source and transit, and also a destination country for trafficking of women and children. And as I said earlier, even men. And you find that girls are exploited in commercial sex throughout Kenya, including sex tourism. You can imagine sex tourism is what also boosts the economy of, tourism is what boosts the economy of our country. And a lot of sexual exploitation happens in this tourism in Nairobi, Kisumu, and also at the coastal areas. Sometimes even in settlements, and which actually is done by family members. And you find that Kenya law prohibits prostitution actually. However, there are very powerful cartels in the country that probably dictate the sex industry. And as to my knowledge, I would not say that I have seen funds that are set aside for sexual or for giving women other alternative means of survival when it comes to damages that has been caused by climate change. What happens is, in most cases, the only thing I have seen being done is with the government is repatriation. And these are very few cases that have been rescued. You find that when women are rescued from maybe prostitution, being forced into prostitution, you find the easiest thing that the government will do is to repatriate them without putting efforts in what or how to support these women. Just get them repatriated to their country so that they can be assisted, or repatriated to the areas so that they can be assisted with the organizations. Most of work is done by NGOs or civil society organization. I think in my country, what support women who are in sexual trade, what they get is from civil societies and NGOs. But
when we talk about climate change, we have resources. Actually, in the country now, the government had set aside money for running programs on climate change. And as I said, that we overlook the issues of sexual violence. So comparing the two, it becomes difficult. But I think these are issues that needs to go hand in hand. Yeah.
Thank you so much. I agree. They need to go hand in hand. And one thing that really stuck with me during your presentation is the sex for fish quote. Would you like to elaborate on how how this affects women and girls in Kenya in terms of not having access to the basic needs such as food?
Yeah, sex. I can say fish. A lot of women are fishmongers. They sell fish, especially women living on the coastal areas and women living in areas where fishing is a source of income. So with climate change, you find that nowadays the part of the lakes have been covered with hyacinth, and there's a lot of fishing that is going on. So there's scarcity of fish. And for these women, they fight for these resources now so that they can have income. And men who are fishermen, they will take advantage of these women, and they don't even need money anymore. They need sex. So you either give sex, you get fish to go and sell. And because you want fish to go and sell, because you want your family to have food, the women go for that. And that is another way of exploiting women and it's a silent pandemic actually, because after this exploitation, the women will get infected with HIV and other diseases, or even face death. Nowadays, there's a lot of femicide, men just killing women, and this frustration it's being caused by a lot of issues like sex for fish. Yeah, it's not even sex for fish alone. We also have sex for water. Like in areas in the northern side of Kenya, we have scarcity of rain. There's drought every now. There's a lot of drought seasons. There's flooding, and you find that most of the time when women lack water, they walk long distances to go and look for water. And here is where we meet that women going long distances, they face a lot of violence. And sometimes the few wells that have been, the few wells that are in northern part of the country, men will take advantage of that, and they will say that it's either you sex or you get water. So it's not fish alone, it's sex for water, sex for fish, sex for pads, sanitary towels for girls. Girls are going outside there and men are taking advantage just to get a sanitary towel to use during your period. And you are paying that dearly because you'll have to sleep with a man to get pads. And you know, the government, these are things that the government should provide freely for even all the girls in the country. But this happens, and it's pushing women into going voluntary into prostitution, because that is the easiest way. Maybe they think that it's the easiest way to get money or survival. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Florence. It's very apparent to me that the basic human rights of women and girls are not prioritized, and I find that this is what we see when we open the lid to this exploitation. It's the basic needs that we are not provided, such as water and food. It's very devastating to hear, but thank you so much for sharing. Going back to the focus and the highlight on the environmental crisis versus the sex trade crisis, so to say, and also the resources aimed at both. What's the situation in Mexico, Rosi?
Okay, since 2007, we opened the first shelter for girls at that time. That's why I always wear this logo. This little doll is the logo for that shelter and reminds me so many girls, so many women that hasn't been rescued. But since 2012, we have a law, the law that we pass unanimous, and the center of that law are the victims. And since 2012, it should have been a fund for victims, money, that's part of the law, but there is zero since then. Zero pesos, $0, zero. So we have been providing for the victims in the shelters without any money from the governments. There is governments that, this is not from parties, because we have had 3 different parties, and this is not about parties. But then in the states where there are willing to end human trafficking, there are states that are congruent, and they close the horrible places where women are sold as objects, table dances, strip clubs. Coahuila, Tamaulipas, State of Mexico, 3 states from 32, they have closed those places, and violence against women and general violence has reduced incredible. Tamaulipas 2016, the governor was, the state was in the 3rd place of violence and organized crime. And as in those places is where everybody gets corrupted, because you take a police, sit a woman, a girl in his lap and takes a picture, and then you blackmail these police, or you join these police with organized crimes in those places. So when Tamaulipas closed in 2016, all the organized crime was reduced. Now, instead of being in the 3rd place of organized crime and violence, is in the 26th place now. So you can see that sometimes to apply less resources is to be firm, because you and us, we know how much costs to help one victim. We have a girl, Isabel, who was brought from Guatemala. She saw how the father killed the mother, and then she ended in Cancun at 6 years old, being forced to prostitution. She arrived to the shelter. It cost so much because she was so traumatized that until 16 years old, she had to take medication, psychiatric medication. Now she's 19 years old and she's so happy, so free. But look, it has been 13, 14 years of treatment for her to be now an extraordinary woman who has open wings and who has a blank page where he's writing a new story. But it is so expensive to help victims. And it is more important if governments are congruent and they say, okay, I want to end this discrimination, this violence against women, so we won't allow that women will be objects being sold in a place. So I think that's the best way that we all will not spend that much money in the recovery, in the treatment of the victims. So yeah, in Mexico, there is zero. In our organization, nobody from the board, not me, we don't have salary. we exploit ourselves, but we don't have the possibility to have money for the shelters. So we do miracles, and 82 victims depends now on us, and we are looking for miracles. But we have seen miracles every day. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I agree. You are performing miracles. You're miracle workers, and you are lifesavers. Very important to highlight. And I wish that one day women would not be seen as less than, so that you would have a proper salary and proper funding to keep doing your important work. Also, I was thinking when you spoke initially about you're a country of natural resources, and I expect that that would mean that large corporations are very interested in these areas to exploit the natural resources, but also that that would probably come with the going hand in hand with them exploiting women. Is this true? And also, how's the situation in terms of the highlight or the talk about the environmental crisis versus the sex trade crisis in Mongolia?
Yes, I mentioned about the country is being rich with the mineral resources, gold, copper, on and on. Especially the southern part of the country has two. I think Oyo Tolga is if I'm not mistaken, that's like #1 copper and a gold mine in the world. Obviously, it attracted so many foreign investment in a different countries, Australia, Canada, so on and so on. And there's also another big coal mine called Tolga. Also big. They export coal like every day, thousands of trucks transport coal to China. I heard like over 2,000 coal trucks cross the Chinese border every day. It was prior to the pandemic. And yes, they do have, the country and the mining companies, they do have a budget for the environmental protection, but I don't think they do have anything in terms of protecting women and girls from sexually exploited. So I was just reading that the Mongolia has 3,273 active mining and exploration licenses in 2019, which means we have 21 provinces. So if you divide this number by 21 provinces, it's like quite a number, right, in each provinces. And because of the mining activities since 2000, in-country migration actually increased. That also, of course, caused the sex trade or sexual exploitation, victimizing women and girls, especially the area bordering with China. Let me quickly, there was, while I was reading, because we do not, because Talita Asia is located mainly work and focusing in the capital city, we don't, because of the resources and the capacity, we don't really reach out to the mining affected area, but thanks to CAF International, we will be starting to work with them soon enough. So, I also heard the other ladies talking about the funding for the shelters and how they lack from it. And again, we luckily to have been supported by Talita and Sweden and their donors and sponsors to be able to provide services to the victims of such crimes, and to highlight that we are the only shelter that provides long-term services in the country. There are other government-run or the NGO-run shelters that's only for the temporary up to 3 months, but we provide it's our services up to 24 months. So luckily we didn't fall under the shortage of the funding, to be able to run, operate our shelters. The government, on the other hand, up until now, I don't think they had any budget set aside for the specific, this target group, the women and girls. But they have a new law, it's child protection law under the amendment. Apparently they have an article, they're actually putting together a budget specifically for the victims of human trafficking in sexual exploitation. So it is under discussion, should be effective in September 2020, to September this year. Hopefully it is, hopefully it gets approved. So the women and the children or the girls who are in need for the funding be able to receive it until now, but we don't receive anything from the government. Back to the mining. Of course, the majority of the mining employees are men, and most of them are not the locals. They're like temporary, or they're on a mobile work schedule, a temporary moving to the local area and go back to home. And some of them bring their families, but because of the long roster of 14 days or 21 days of a roster, they have to leave the kids and the family behind unattended, especially the children unattended. And there's a new concept called child-headed family in the mining communities. So the both parents or single parent, they leave for work, leave the children behind, home unattended. They are greater risk for being sexually exploited or lured into the prostitution. So that's quite a development because of the mining activities. And there's also another concept, they call it, like Florence mentioned, the sex for fish. There's also a concept called sex for fuel, the fuel girls. These are the girls and the women who move from truck to truck for sex for a fuel, or some are paid with the money, some paid with the fuel or jewelry, whatnot, so that they can sell it for money to feed their families. Like I mentioned before, that like 2,000 trucks, they cross the border. That's quite a long line of trucks, right? From the nearest urban development to the border is about 100 kilometers. So sometimes the truck drivers have to stay and wait for the line a month or 2 months. So you don't know how many women and girls work as fuel girls. So mostly they're from a few families or don't have an income sources. So that's actually, I think I carried away, right? But this is the situation with the mining activities in the country.
Thank you so much. Men always find a way to exploit women if they want to, whether it's fuel or fish or water or money. Thank you. It was very interesting to hear all of this. Benita, would you like to share some views from the United States in terms of both highlighting the issue of the climate crisis versus sex trade crisis, but also the funds? You mentioned that you're working with very little funds, of course.
Yeah, funds is always an issue, you know. I mean, we do a lot of grant writing, you know, which is helpful to get funds for the program. But that's more and more people are I'm going to say, shying away from from funding this issue, which is kind of a sad thing to me. But you know, we're Breaking Free is still up and going, but not like it, you know, it gets harder and harder for the money. But as far as the issue with the women, and I think the political issue here right now is there's a whole lot of talk in the United States about you know, decriminalizing prostitution. And that's been the talk, is what I'm going to say. That's what we're hearing. And I'm like, for whatever crazy reason, that politicians are believing that if we somehow take a look at it, we can make it a better thing. You know what I mean? If we legalize prostitution, so to say, it'll be better for the women. And that's what a lot of the political talk is right now around up here. And so, I mean, we've got bigger issues. First, let's talk about what we need to do with the women that are dying and being killed while in prostitution. I didn't say anything. In South Dakota, they have the pipeline that they're putting in, and we have a lot of women that are taken from really all over the country to South Dakota. Pimps are taking them there because there's so many men there that they're you know, taking them there to sell them, and women are getting hurt very badly. You know what I mean? They can't get out. They're getting younger and younger. But right now, again, like I was talking about with COVID and everything, the issue is legalized. Should we look at if making prostitution a legal thing or decriminalization or what have you? And I'm like, I think we have bigger fish to fry. You know what I mean? I think we need to recognize that prostitution, what the damage will be, should we try to legalize something like this, what that'll do to all of the country. You know, we've got Las Vegas, that little piece there that has legalized prostitution. And I've worked with women from there, and the things that they have said that they go through, you know, just having to work in those brothels in Vegas. And I'm like, that would be the picture. That's what everybody would use as, you know, as the example. This is what we should do. But right now here, that's a big thing. You know, that's what everybody, that's on all the books right now. Should we, you know, legalize or not legalize, decriminalize? What should we do with this? We, you know, and it's men that's calling out for this, you know, and pretty much insisting, you know what I mean, that we really look into it. But with all the things happening in our country and just in the world, I would think that we would have, it just bothers me, you know what I mean? And then we have women, like I say, dying daily, you know, on the streets, living in tents right now as we talk, you know, that have no place to go. And we're saying, well, how could legalization make that better for her? You know, so that's really a big issue in the United States. We're really talking about that a whole lot. What should we do with it?
Thank you so much. I've heard this as well. I've heard the trends going around in the States on legalizing, and I always come to think, if they would have listened to you before saying that it would be safer for the women, I think there would be no problem. But I also think that what they're legalizing is not sex trade or sex purchase. What they're legalizing is the killing and the hurting.
That's right.
And the exploitation of the women. So I think we just need to twist the language and say, no, we're not legalizing someone purchasing sex. We're legalizing the killing and the hurting of the women.
That's
it makes
right.
me really, really mad, actually.
That's what it's about.
Going up. Yeah. Thank you so much. Just stay with me, Vendita. I'm thinking you've all mentioned the COVID crisis and pandemic in some way, and I was wondering, just briefly, what have we learned from COVID in terms of the work that we do and that we need to do for these women and girls? Vendita, would you like to start?
Well, to me, again, it goes back to, we need to educate people and help them to understand the bigger picture of this, the dynamics of how prostitution, the realities of what it really is. And we just fall back again on resources. you know, because what we're seeing up here is generational prostitution. If the mother's involved, it's highly likely that the daughter is going to follow. You know what I mean? And that's what we're seeing. We're not just working with the mother. We have her daughter sitting next to her. We had a mother who went through our program, and she left. You know, it's so hard to, you know, you have to get clean, you deal with addiction, you deal with all kinds of childhood trauma when you're trying to get out of this life. And so the mother kind of, she moved on. And now we're working with her daughter who just had a baby. And what her daughter was doing, her daughter was about 8 years old when she was in the program. Now she's about, you know, 20. And what's happening is she was hiding her baby in the bushes and turning tricks. I mean, but I'm just, this is so generational, and she's got a little boy. Okay, we were able to find her housing and help her. But it gets back to resources. We can only do so much, you know. And I said, we work with 500 women and girls a year. That's a lot of individuals. And the major issue is housing, you know. And I always say, how can they get out and how can they change their life if they don't even have a place to lay their head at night? They end up going back to what they know, because they have to stay somewhere. It gets cold here in Minnesota. You know what I mean? In the winter, it is very cold, and you can't survive really on the streets. And so you end up living with pimps, with tricks, with Johns, with, you know. So to me, it goes back to resources, and it goes back to money. You know what I mean? And we have to figure out some way, how can we solve that?
Well, thank you. I agree. And I also think it's very interesting in terms of the pandemic that resources were a big question during the pandemic, of course, not only for healthcare, but also for vaccines, etc., and the provision of vaccines. But also, I feel that most countries, including Sweden, forgot about all of these issues in the financing, of course. Thank you so much. Dolso, what do you think we've learned from the pandemic in terms of the work we need to do for these women and girls?
We had quite a challenge with the code, like I mentioned earlier, especially with the first year. Well, I think beginning of the COVID, Mongolia was praised to be the only country with no detected or the case of COVID detection whatsoever, and closing the border. But then eventually we lost it and we were never prepared for how to handle not just the work we do, but then generally, you know, we were never prepared. Even the schools, they were never used the online version of the teaching or the online version of having a meeting and talking and so on and so on. It was quite a hit on us. Even the lawmakers, the decision makers, they didn't know what to do. They just thought the closing down everything, locking down everything, or restricting their traveling maybe solve the problem, you know, prevent people getting infected or whatnot. Because of the really strict, very strict restrictions, we had a hard time. I mean, traveling between the shelters. So when we taking them to the hospital, because hospitals went open for general illness, or whether it's only the COVID, everything was COVID. So somehow we need to be prepared for all kinds of unexpectedness, you know. So now eventually we are learning, I mean, how to do work, at least to prevent ourselves. I mean, help our employees to use the self-protection, you know, the protective measures in order to help the girls and the women who needs our help. So that's what we learned, you know. So.
Yeah, This was so interesting. Self-protection to help and protect the women that need us is so important. It's been on my mind being one of the leaders at our organization to keep the staff safe and well, of course, to keep everyone being able to give the best support to the women in need, of course, but also prepare for the unexpectedness. Very well put. Rosie, would you like to share something about what you've learned in terms of the pandemic and COVID? What have you learned in terms of our work and what we need to do?
Yeah, everything was more difficult, especially for taking care of the victims. But we are very conscious of how important is long-term treatment. We are very worried with the pandemic because of the crisis. Also, so many of our donors were having problems. The president of our board is a restaurant owner, so he's having problems until now. But we are very conscious of how difficult it is for the victims if you don't give them the wings to fly. Because I'm now talking to two girls who were victims of the Melendez case. Melendez case, I know that Benita Carter must have heard. It was people from Mexico, from Tlaxcala, who were taking the victims to New York. And there are several victims, but two of them are now talking to me. And it scares me so bad that America, United States, has more money than Mexico. And one of these victims wants to end her life. She just tried to eat some pills. She tried to kill herself like 2 weeks ago. And the case is closed. The traffickers are going to have 40 years in jail, but she is not well. And it's the same in my book, Blank Page. The first chapter is another of the Melendez case, who tried 3 times to commit suicide. So imagine in the coronavirus crisis, imagine with the people that we live sometimes without the treatment in long term. We have to understand that victims of human trafficking, their traumas are so bad. One of the most famous one, I am going to say something so intimate. I'm not going to say her name because of that, but she was telling me how difficult it was to have a relationship with a man, because they will ask, hey, I am in sex as good as your last clients. I mean, things that I never expected to hear, and how difficult it has been after 14 years of treatment, that she cannot marry and have a stable relationship with a man because of all this trauma. She was raped so many times, thousands of men, when she was 12, 13, 14, 15. So right now, we really believe that the NGOs that we help victims, we have to be open to give them our hand in long term, until they have wings to fly. Yeah.
I agree, and I'm so happy that we have a joint view of this today, and I'm very sure that we who are here today in our organizations will always stand by the women for as long as they need it, as we are all, as you mentioned, miracle workers. Florence, would you like to share what have you learned in terms of the pandemic and COVID, in terms of the work that you do?
Just like the rest of us, I think I've learned that we should be prepared every now and always, because you don't know what is going to come anytime of the day of the year. And also something also I've learned is, even as women who are fighting and taking care of other women and doing all this work, we are no longer even safe. And especially for those women who are active and activists outside there, this space is shrinking for us, and we can't just sit like this. We need to get allies. We need to get people also to support us as people who are supporting others. And I would just say sometimes you look at organizations that are giving out resources, and you find that a lot of bureaucracy and channels of accessing money cannot help during time of crisis like the COVID-19. And you find organizations that give resources are very few, like the Urgent Action Fund, where you can just write and you get money immediately. There are very few, and how many people will they support? Very few organizations. So we need just to be prepared, and we also need ourselves to also prepare ourselves for us every time we step our feet outside our houses. Yeah.
Thank you so much. What amazing work is done throughout the world. I'm very humbled. And I'm also very humbled that you've all mentioned Sweden's role in the abolitionist movement and the legislation that we have. And for sure, it didn't come easy, but I also recognize that we have advantages here in terms of funding, etc., that might not be the same throughout the world. So in that area, Sweden holds more seminars during the Commission on the Status of Women. One of them is the Swedish Women's Lobby holding a seminar next week in terms of sex work is not work, fight demand and end sexual exploitation in the climate crisis era. So, and I know that a lot of high-level speakers and legislators and decision makers will be in that seminar. So I was wondering, lastly, if you would just like to, what would you like to tell them in terms of what we need to do and how can we create adequate exit schemes and protection for these women and so that they can survive and get their blank page, so to say, and get their wings to fly again? What would you like to send? What message would you like to send to these decision makers? I will for sure pass along the message. Would you like to start, Florence?
What I would like to say is governments and other state agencies that are working towards climate change or just towards sexual violence and what I need to tell them to advance policies to fight climate change, to advance better legal protections for women who are caught up in this issue of displacement, and also to always link environment issues and socioeconomic disparities whereby women are at the center of the issues that are being talked about. You know, sometimes I always say that let us all invest in knowledge and solutions. While we know that gender-based violence is an environmental degradation, an environmental crime, let us learn from women. I think women are better positioned in areas where they can put their agenda ahead of everything. I was actually following up the conference on climate justice, the one that happened in Madrid, and the participating states agreed on the second gender action plan, which the goal was to put women on equal footing on all levels of climate policy, like in our institutions, in our organizations. Like women talk about the climate change and they know the mitigations themselves. And this has, I don't know if this has ever started in some countries, but where I'm coming from, I think it was just a talk and it ended there. But now that in the meeting that you'll be going to, please tell them to review that. Tell them if women are given opportunities to adapt to climate change and improve their income situation, everyone will benefit, including children and men. Yeah.
Thank you so much. What an inspiration. I'm writing to save my life here to pass a message along, as I promised to do. Rossio, what message would you like me to bring to them?
Well, I'm going to put in my social media, Rossio Orozco, an article about fishing, for example, in Mexico, how companies that are international come and exploit our fishermen and all this industry, agriculture and fishing. And these industries should have funds. Oh, they are doing so much, you know, some of these illegal also wood companies that are doing something illegal in doing this climate change. They should be the ones who give money for funds for victims, because we are really lucky with a lack of funds for the victims. And a second thing that I would like you to tell especially the ones who take the decision for a country, as we have in Mexico, Coahuila, Tamaulipas, and the state of Mexico that closed the street clubs, the table dances, the places where women are objects, were objects. We should have these firm policies. I was in the United States in a state where I admire, and I think he's an incredible governor, and he was speaking about against human trafficking. And then I saw so many places that are strip clubs that looks like a concentration camp, even without windows. And we can see some of the series that we have seen, how these women are trapped for their vulnerabilities, and then they are in drugs, they are trapped with invisible chains, but there is people who are profiting on those things. So we have to be firm not to have those places, and of course, like Sweden, to have a laws that will punish the demand. And especially like you and France are doing, to have a fine, to have money that the clients will pay for the exit of the people who are in situation of prostitution. If we have those funds, we will really have an opportunity. It's not that I starve or I go to prostitution. It's I have this money from the government that takes away from the clients of the prostitution, and then this money, these fines, are going to give the money for opportunities, real opportunities for the women and girls that are in this situation. We should be firm in our countries to end human trafficking and to end the exploitation of women and girls.
Thank you so much. I highly agree. The Johns or the companies, whoever it might be, should be the ones who are held accountable, both legally, of course, but also monetarily. That would be amazing if they would have to pay for support services, etc. Dolso, what would you like me what message would you like me to pass forward?
Women shouldn't be less than a man. They have to have equal rights, equal opportunities. One of the girls who stayed in our shelter, I think one of the girls told us the story that the police caught her and the man in the hotel, right? The action. And apparently the police let the men walk away without getting punished. But she was the guilty party, not the man. So I really envy the Sweden and the Nordic countries to have adopted such great laws. And if we could get the same laws to protect the girls and the women, not to protect the buyer side, that would be incredible. I don't know how I would get it happen, but that's the message I would like to send. So.
Thank you so much. I agree. Sweden export many things, but I think if we can export this model throughout the world, I will be as proud as ever to be a Swede. Vednita, what message would you like me to pass on to the decision makers?
Mine, I ditto everything that everybody said because they said some powerful things. But for me, I guess, I'm just women need to be listened to. Now centuries and centuries, we have been trying to talk about the hurt and the pain, the things that have been happening to us. We need policymakers that are gonna finally make some changes for women and hear us, you know what I mean? Because why should our granddaughters and our great-granddaughters have to sit at this table and go through the same things that we're going through with trying to explain this hurts us? Prostitution is violence against women and girls. And then I can't say it enough. We need some politicians that are going to begin to hold men accountable for their role in this. And that to me is a big thing. So many of the men that came through breaking free were doctors and lawyers and had, incomes of 100,000 a year and more. We need to begin to hold them accountable and make them pay for the damage that they caused. So they need to hear that.
Thank you so much. And thank you. This is an amazing panel. I'm going to give you some applause here. I hope everyone watching is doing the same. I would also like to tell our dear panelists that there have been some questions in the chat that I haven't been able to lift due to the time. But if you want to take a glance at the chat room, feel free if you want to get in touch with someone there. But thank you so much to all the panelists. It's been an amazing talk. I've learned so much, and I applaud you for the work that you do throughout the world with little funds and standing up for women. It's amazing, and you are amazing. Thank you so much for participating today.
Thank you.
Right, let's see.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
Can
you.
get some slides back up. I will just wrap this up now since we're running out of time, but a few minutes left. I would just like to end with a quote. We've learned a lot today, I think, in terms of exploitation, both of resources, but also of women and girls and human bodies. And this is a quote by Lisa Brunner, and I think it's amazing in terms of learning that in communities where women are more free from rape, the land is also more free from exploitation and destruction, as told by the anthropologist Peggy Sunday. This quote is from Lisa Brunner. She's the White Earth Ojibwe program specialist for the National Indigenous Women's Resource Center in USA. And she puts it well: they think they can own us, buy us, sell us, trade us, rent us, poison us, rape us, destroy us, use us as entertainment, and kill us. I'm happy to see that we are talking about the level of violence that is occurring against Mother Earth because it equates to us. What happens to her happens to us. And in ending the seminar, I would like to say that whatever crisis, stand with women and girls, whether it's war, climate crisis, pandemic crisis. We have learned today that women and girls suffer the most. Men keep exploiting women and girls in any crisis and in any situation. So whatever the situation and whatever the crisis, stand with women and girls. Next slide, please. Thank you so much, everyone, for listening today. Thank you especially to our panelists. What an amazing panel we've had, amazing inputs from throughout the world. If you want to learn more about our organizations who are hosting these events, you can see our info here at this slide. Please don't hesitate to contact us if you have any question. For now, thank you, and I hope to see you soon again. Bye.